For nearly 30 years, this wall kept East Germans prisoners in their own country. Many voted with their feet against that repression. There were daring escapes and frightening moments of brutality when a fleeing East German was felled by a border guard's bullet. But in the fall of 1989, massive protests and a sputtering East German economy led to the opening of the Berlin Wall, and eventually the fall of the hardline communist government of Erich Honecker. This is the story of how the persistent actions of the churches of East Germany played a quiet but essential role in the fall of the wall. This is West Berlin. That's the Berlin Wall with the Brandenburg Gate in East Berlin just behind it. The first indication that the Berlin Wall was going to come down came about at the end of a 2-hour speech by a member of the East German Politburo. People weren't really sure what they had heard, so many of them went to the wall to see if it was really going to be open.
And it was true. And people had tears in their eyes and couldn't believe the fact that they had concrete the other day. There was a gap now, and you could pass in both directions. That was something, yes.
Reinhard Kraft lives in West Berlin. He is a Lutheran minister and part of the Ecumenical Missionary Institute. He has been a close observer of East Germany, particularly of its churches and religious groups. In the midst of the joy which exploded across the two Germanys when the wall was opened and the rapid political changes that followed, the vital role of East Germany's churches in this peaceful revolution has been overlooked.
Church played an important role in this change, I'm sure.
Experts on East Germany point to 3 factors that brought about the quiet revolution. In Germany, it is known as the Wende, or the change. The first was the liberal policies of Mikhail Gorbachev, which gave no support to any reprisals by the East German government against the rising protests. Another was the impact of West German television on East Germany, which provided images of the glitter and openness of the West. And a third factor was the persistent pressure of the churches of East Germany. And the citizens of East Germany acknowledged this role.
The change is very correct for the people, and the church helped the people in this land.
It was a remarkable role for an institution which the communist government had tried to both repress and ignore during 4 decades in power. Church members were kept from advancing in society. The membership of the church was aging, but the church kept up a thoughtful witness in the midst of repression. The church has deep roots in East Germany's soil. It is the home of Martin Luther, who is known as the Great Reformer. Luther first tacked his 95 Theses protesting abuses in the Roman Catholic Church of his day to the doors of this church, the Castle Church in Wittenberg. That document launched the Reformation. Today, his statue dominates the town square of Wittenberg. Something of his spirit still remains in this city, where the majority of workers commute on their bicycles to aging factories. In fact, the current pastor of the Castle Church is Friedrich Schorlemer. He frequently spoke out against the communist leaders from his pulpit here in Wittenberg.
Yes, we had a new reformation in our land here, and we need a reformation in the government, and we need a reformation in our heart. Yes, and I look for a connection. The 2 problems, yes.
The 2 largest churches of East Germany are the Evangelical United Church and the Methodist Church. Of the 15 million people in East Germany, about 4 million are members of the Evangelical United Church, which is composed of Lutheran and Reformed churches. The Lutherans are the dominant group. The Methodists have about 200 congregations around the country. While the communists were trying to wall in the country, many of East Germany's Christians worked out strategies for dealing with and challenging the governing powers. They protested the presence of nuclear weapons on East German soil. They encouraged the government to put up housing for the elderly and were paid by the government to care for the handicapped of the society. The church in East Germany was a servant church, caring for and welcoming the neediest. It became a respected institution. Church leaders and pastors became highly regarded.
One could know that you can trust into them. You know, if three people are together in the DDR, you never knew who is the one who is a spy and who reports to the national security. And you could be sure that the pastor wouldn't be among them.
This climate of respect helped catapult the churches into an important role in 1982. At that time, unrest began to develop against the communist government. Citizens were pushing the government to allow them to leave. To accommodate the unrest, churches allowed those who disagreed with the government to meet in church facilities for what became known as peace services. In 1989, those services began to swell in size and turned into peaceful demonstrations against the government. They started first in Leipzig and then they spread to other East German cities. And they came here to East Berlin. This is the Parliament building known as the Volkskammer. They filled this square here with 150,000 people. No one in East Germany had seen anything like it before. The churches of East Germany were part of an infrastructure that were the only places where dissenting groups were allowed to gather.
They gave the rooms for the people to come together and to say what must be done and to discuss the problems, also the difficulties. So they helped the people at first to say what must be done.
Even the communists admit the role of the church in the change. After the fall of the Honecker government, the Communist Party changed its name from the Socialist Unity Party to the Party for Democratic Socialism. They worked hard to put on a bright new face for East Germany's first free elections, but people have fled party ranks. Andrew Rader works in the international department. The Socialist Party is not valued in the way it was before in this country. Many have left the party.
That's true. Our party membership of our party was more than 2 million. It is now, after the recent first Congress of this new party, is about 700,000 members.
That's a big loss.
Yes, that's true.
How do you explain it?
I think it is very difficult to explain it in a sense, in one sentence. But I think a number of mistakes, serious mistakes of this party, not only in the recent few days or weeks, but in the last few years, which led to this, as we call it, and is also my personal opinion, crisis of our system and the party work here.
The role of the church in bringing about the change.
I think it wouldn't be exactly the point that the church has brought about this change, because I think it was broader masses of this country who brought this change about. But I would agree that the church played a very, very significant role and is still playing a very vital role in these changes today.
Church members and church leaders are modest about taking much credit for the changes in East Germany. Ralph Zorn is a Lutheran pastor who has ministered with Lutheran Relief Services in East Berlin and served as a pastor in West Berlin.
They're not pinning buttons on their breasts and saying, look what we did. They're leaving the question in other hands to judge. A, because it's too early to judge, and B, because it's not the nature of the church to, with the experience of the 40 years in the GDR, to assume a triumphalistic stance.
When the Nazis controlled Germany, they made the mainline churches of the country follow the party line. There was little formal protest against Nazi policies, against the persecution of the Jews and the Holocaust, but there were a few voices who spoke out. A confessing church was formed. Many of its leaders, like Martin Niemöller and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, were imprisoned. The East German church learned from that experience. Its leaders determined they would not be used on behalf of any government.
The basic of the church is not some secular message, but it's the word of God in the Bible, and this is the basis. And then I think the church had to separate itself from a kind of bourgeois tradition. The German Protestantism was very, very closely linked with culture and with the government. And in the DDR, I think they learned a little better than we learned that the church has to be independent and that there is no principal opposition to socialist traditions. There's no, this opposition doesn't stem from the gospel. It was perhaps part of our ecclesiastical tradition, but it is not to be found in the gospel. The church should be in opposition to Marxism or socialism.
So the East German church did not battle the communist regime by saying it was ungodly or unbiblical. It believed it could coexist, but it also believed it should challenge the regime and that it should not be silent in the face of injustice, as so many churches were under the Nazis.
Experience of the Third Reich has shown us that there are situations where we can, well, if you're going to go back to the Acts, we have to obey God rather than man. And we have to stand by people who, for conscience sake, out of their faith, are in a difficult situation. This does not mean that we become an anti-party or that we become a sociological fifth column. They weren't that. But there were always instances, specific areas, specific times where they had to say this far and no further.
Individual Christians found they could live out their faith in a Marxist state.
It was not easy, but it was possible. For instance, in comparison with other socialist countries, like, for instance, the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia, people who wanted to be and to remain Christians had a chance, although sometimes there were serious repercussions. But it was possible, much easier than in some other countries.
Which was the more Christian act, to stay or to leave?
To stay. To stay.
In fact, many experts believe that if committed Christians had fled to the West before the wall crumbled, the change would never have happened.
And that's what the bishop said. And that those who remained, the democratic uprising would never been a success.
My family and myself, we have certain deep roots in this country. And we have been of the opinion that it is not good and it is not possible that everybody leaves this country. This would be an empty space, would have become an empty space.
Konrad Meyer is one of those who remained. He is an instructor in the College of Education in East Berlin. He and his friend were university classmates. The friend is from West Germany. When the wall went up, his friend continued to live in West Germany while he decided to remain in East Germany. The two friends came together again at this worship service, the first combined service for East and West Berlin churches. It was held at the historic Dome Church in East Berlin.
And you have been friends for how many years?
For
44?
47 years. 47 years. Yes.
But you in the West and you here in the
yes.
East.
Yeah.
And yet you've maintained the friendship. How has
Yes.
it been maintained?
Well, this is I must say this is a great merit of my friend, who took chances to keep in touch with us all the time. He came to our country at least once a year, sometimes several times. We could not go. It was only a one-way road, so to say. But this is only a very rare case, I must say.
So he kept the relationship up.
He kept the relationship.
The church here doesn't forget its true nature. Erich Honecker was head of the state for 2 decades. At times, he repressed the church heavily. What's happened to the church here in East Germany is a model of what's happened to the people of God down through the ages. When Honecker was arrested, a judge ruled that he was too sick to be put in prison, but he was such an outcast that no agency of the government would welcome him. So now, the East German church has opened its doors to him, and Erich Honecker spends his days as the guest of an East German Lutheran pastor. Honecker is welcomed by the church which he had originally rejected.
He is one of the responsible people for many bad things, and I think he has to be accused. And he really knew what he did, and he was responsible. But of course, he is also a human being, and we should deal with him as a human being.
I think this is an open signal, an open sign of forgiving, and this is a Christian faith in action, as it should be.
The wall came down on November 10th, 1989. That's the same date as Martin Luther's birthday. Another man, a reformer, who helped bring down walls. And the comparison is not lost here on people of faith. Statues of Martin Luther, the great reformer, crop up in many places in this land of his birth. This statue disappeared from in front of St. Mary's Church in East Berlin during World War II. No one seemed to know where it was. But as the protests continued to grow during the fall of 1989, the East German government suddenly had the statue re-erected beside the church, perhaps as a sign of conciliation. Gunther Luther is a West German businessman and a direct descendant of the great reformer.
Maybe God decided to bring it here to set a sign. Now new reformation and the revolution begins.
East German Christians are concerned and perplexed about what will happen in this new revolution. They are uncertain of their long-term role in a united Germany, but they have had a vital role in the transition period. Church leaders were asked to convene what became known as the Round Table, and this body brought together both new and old parties to discuss how a new government would be formed and to lay down some principles under which that government would operate. 3 church leaders chair the gathering: a Catholic Monsignor, a Lutheran pastor, and a Methodist pastor, Martin Lange.
It is a very unexpected role for us as representatives from different churches. The beginning of the changes last year in November, the new political parties and groups which have not been recognized by the official government asked the church to bring different representatives from such groups together with the representatives of the established parties of the, as we call it, Volkskammer. This is the parliament of the German Democratic Republic. And so the churches invited those people to come together and to have a round table discussion.
The table is no longer round. This is one of their last sessions. And at this session, they are discussing how the new government should view former members of the Stasi, East Germany's secret police, which may have employed as many as 80,000 people. In a society as controlled and watched as East Germany was, it was still possible to function as a concerned Christian. You had a government that was, in a sense, a dictatorship. Can you function as a Christian in that sort of an environment?
I have only one answer to your question. No doubt about it. Of course you can.
A Christian could function fully in East Germany?
Oh yes, he could function. He didn't have that privileges which we have. Sometimes they were short of paper to print their matters. Sometimes they were not allowed to have their meeting if this meeting was not biblical or Christians in a very strict sense, and it was the party to define what is Christian in a strict sense. But this, I wouldn't call it oppression. I wouldn't go that far to call about persecution or oppression. But this hindrance of the didn't really, couldn't stop the impact. It didn't do any real harm to the real church life of the church. That's my statement.
Many East German Christians are fearful of what German unification may mean for the feisty and lean East German churches. The concern is that they may simply be swallowed by the much larger and wealthier churches of West Germany and lose the vitality of their less affluent life.
We wanted to have our own democracy and we wanted to develop it. But now it seems to be that we will be very quickly integrated into the Western world, and it is not so clear to us if this really was what we wanted. I always had the feeling that because we were poorer, we were also nearer to the third world people and so on. So I was not so interested to have more than we had. I think we had enough.
This is the Schöneberg Lutheran Church in West Berlin. It was built right next to the old church. The churches of West Germany have had the money to build new churches. That hasn't been so in East Germany. In part, that wealth is due to the fact that the West German economy has done so well, and because of what's known as the church tax, which is an unusual relationship of West Germany's larger churches to the state.
If you're Lutheran and the government takes 35% of your income as tax, you can designate that 9% of that 35% will go as a tax or contribution to your church. The East German church can't do that. That's a strictly voluntarily supported church. But here in West Germany, because of the relationship between church and state, the government passes the offering plate.
The West German churches used their wealth to help East German churches. They also tried to upstage the communists with what some East Germans regarded as an excessive display of wealth. The Church of the Dome stands right across from the East German Parliament building. The West German church poured about $50 million into rebuilding this church. The sentiment was that it would be a powerful testimony to have a restored church, which could also serve as the headquarters of the United Church, next to the most important building in the East German government. Many in the East German church protested that the money should be spent on people, not buildings. Before the restoration could be completed, the dictatorship of the Communist Party collapsed. West German Christians say they are learning something about wealth and priorities from their East German brothers and sisters.
They can teach us to live very simple and from the word of the Bible, and to take part of the problems of daily life. I think we can learn very much from them here, because we can have all the money we need for things to do, and so we are not forced to think what is important and what is not important.
As the East German Church anticipates the future, there is the feeling that many pastors who have been active in the politics of the country will return to their pulpits. Though lay people and pastors are playing a vital role in the political changes that are sweeping through the country, some church leaders, like Martin Beer, pastor of the Dome Church, anticipate the church moving away from frontline politics.
Also ich denke, die Kirche wird sich dann auf ihre eigentliche...
I feel that the church will withdraw from its intensive involvement in political activity, which it has expressed in recent months, once the transition has been made, and then the church will return to its former involvement in the proclamation of the gospel, in the fostering of music and the personal and spiritual life of the people.
But in East Germany's first free elections, 14 pastors were elected to the new parliament. Several have cabinet-level posts. No matter how much church leaders and members may pull back from frontline politics, pastors like Friedrich Schorlemer believe the church of the future will still be a catalyst in dealing with issues. This time, not just East German issues.
Freedom and peace in Europe. This is the first problem. No the nation question. I think that is the old problem. The new problem is united nation, not German nation.
The issue is not a united
Yes.
Germany, but a united Europe?
Yes. First united Europe, and in the process also united Germany. Yes.
What is the message for the churches of the West from these congregations that for more than 4 decades carried out a sacrificial and responsible witness?
First, keep your freedom, be slaves to no man, and know where your allegiance lies. The second thing I would say is because of this, you'd have to always have and keep an eye out for those on the underside, the bottom of society, the suffering, the oppressed, the misfits, those who have no one to take up their case.
The message, if there is a message, I would say, do not hesitate to critically observe and analyze the society in which you live, and be the salt and be the light, and listen to the voices of those who suffer in your society, and I think there you will find Christ, the living Christ.
Though unification may lead to the disappearance of the East German Church inside its larger sister churches in West Germany, its faithful defiance and its servant-like posture provides a powerful lesson for communities of faith forced to live under oppressive governments. This is Bill Turpie in East Berlin for VISN.
You'll come to take them over.